Some of you may find this a little hard to believe, but I used to be a boy soprano. Now, obviously, that was a few decades and a few octaves ago, not something I did a couple of weeks ago, but I began my musical life as a boy soprano. And I was, if I may say so myself, pretty good. Good enough, anyway, that I was chosen at the age of 11 to be the head chorister of a national choir called the Berkshire Boys Choir that was based in Lenox, Massachusetts, and used as its home base the Tanglewood Festival, the summer home of the Boston Symphony, much like our own Ravinia. So I went out that summer and spent the entire summer singing the most glorious choral music ever written, from all the way from the 15th century to works of the mid-20th century. And we performed up and down the eastern seaboard as well as at Tanglewood. And one of the works that we prepared was a work that actually is normally done around Christmas by Benjamin Britten, the marvelous work, A Ceremony of Carols, a collection of songs to poetry from the 15th, 16th, and 17th centuries. It's one of the most marvelous, poignant pieces of music written in the entire 20th century, in my mind anyway. And one particular day we were rehearsing in our hall, and the conductor was a man named George Guest from St. John's College, Cambridge. But I noticed that in the back of the room, the assistant conductor, James Litton from the Westminster Choir College, was there with another man we didn't know, as we were singing through A Ceremony of Carols by Benjamin Britten. And this other man was looking at the score and having a cigarette sort of repeatedly during the rehearsal. This is 1970, different time. And we sang through the work, and when we were finished, George Guest turned to the man in the back of the room and said, do you have anything you'd like to add? And the man put out his cigarette and he walked forward and he said, my name is Benjamin Britten, and I think you sing my music beautifully, but I think you can sing it even better. And for the next hour, he rehearsed us on A Ceremony of Carols. And even at the tender age of 11, I knew this was one of those moments. One of those moments that simply wasn't going to be repeated. And suddenly, what before had just been notes on a page became something transcendent. We weren't just singing, we were now soaring, we were floating, we were flying. And what had previously just been sounds now became grace and beauty and joy. You've had moments like that too, I bet. Moments in your life, suddenly and felt, maybe tasted differently than it did just a moment before. Perhaps it was when your proposal to your beloved was accepted, or when you watched the birth of a child, or perhaps it was getting that promotion or that recognition or that award for which you had struggled and labored. Perhaps it was a work of art at the Art Institute or some other, and seeing the world in a different way, or hearing a piece of music at the symphony, the opera here in church that suddenly broke open the way you perceived reality. Maybe even something as simple as seeing a gorgeous sunrise over the lake on Lakeshore Drive on your way to work. We've all had them. Thing looked and smelled and tasted and felt different than it did before. Our friends Peter and Andrew, James and John had such a moment in today's gospel, didn't they? They went up onto a mountain with their rabbi, probably anticipating that they were going to spend some time in prayer or talking, simply resting after the labors of being part of his ministry. And there, out of nowhere, they see their Lord, their teacher, their rabbi, transfigured before them, his clothes dazzling white, his face sun. And they see standing with him Moses and Elijah, the two great figures of the people of Israel. And as if that were not enough, then a cloud descends upon them, and they hear the voice of God saying, "This is my son. Listen to him." What a remarkable moment. What an incredible experience for those three. And I don't know, of course, exactly with us. None of us was there. We know that something happened, that there was some experience that Peter and James and John had that Peter then told to Mark or was passed down through the community of faith, some transformative moment wherein they witnessed Jesus changed. And surely for those three, nothing was ever quite the same. I'd like to believe personally that what they saw at that moment wasn't a changed Jesus. It was the true Jesus. It was Jesus as he always was and indeed is. That ultimately what happened was simply that the veil that prevented them from seeing him in his glory at all times in that way was lifted. And they saw the true Christ, always glowing, always transformed, always filled with the holiness and the Spirit, the grace and joy of God. And that's really maybe the power of a transformation or transfiguration. It's not that it's an isolated event, but instead that it lifts the veil and we see the way life in fact always is when it isn't clouded over by our own obsessions or concerns, our addictions or actions. Seeing that marvelous work of art at the Art Institute can remind us that art always has the power to illumine, to transform. Hearing that incredible piece of music can remind us that all music has that power as well. It's not just isolated moments, but instead they reveal to us those moments, the depth and the richness, the power and the glory, the joy and the delight that is possible if we are but open to it. I mean, the truth is, on the top of the mountain, we have to come down. We do spend most of our life laboring and working and sometimes trudging our way through things. As somebody wrote just this week on the internet, remember 1/7 of our lives is lived on Monday. It's true, isn't it? And yet, those sunrises, that birth of a child, that piece of art, that revelation that can break in when we don't expect it, when we haven't created it, when we haven't planned it, those moments sustain and strengthen us, reminding us that that's what life really is when we're open to it. And I think it's about that the God coming to the three disciples says to them, "This is my son, listen to him." Not just because of what he says or what he does, but because of who he is, which you now have seen manifested before you. Listen to him when he says that love is the path to peace and weakness is the path to strength. Don't write him off as simply a well-meaning, out-of-touch character. When he says, love your neighbor as yourself, don't write him off as some idealistic dreamer. When he says, do not seek the riches of this world, but instead seek the riches of the kingdom of God, don't write him off as simply someone who is naive and otherworldly. Instead, the voice reminds us, this is the physical manifestation of the glory and holiness of God. Listen to him. Not because he can work wonders, not because he can work marvels, not even because of the words he speaks, but because of who he is, shining and resplendent and transfigured with God's grace and presence. As I said, we can't live on the top of the mountain. We do. And that's part of this story as well. That right after this event, comes down from the mountain and right back into the brokenness, the lostness, the darkness of the world. The very next thing that Jesus does is to heal a sick child. Even he himself does not stay there. But I'll bet that this experience, this encounter, sustained Jesus through what he had a sense was going to happen. Surely this affirmation of his identity and his connection to God strengthened him as he shed those tears of blood in the Garden of Gethsemane, as he sent Judas away to betray him with a kiss, as he looked Pilate in the eye, as he faced down and endured the cruel and mindless brutality of soldiers. This experience sustained him through all the darkness that was to come, because God was present with him, reminding Jesus and the disciples that God is not a God just of the past, but also the present and the future, and present with us as we go through the Mondays of life. So these moments, which can break in at any time, don't just give us a glimpse of something unique. They in fact reveal what truly is. As I said, we can't manufacture them. You can't create a holy moment, can you? It just happens. A sip of wine and a touch of bread. The look in a mother's eyes as she plays in the park with her child. That sunrise over the lake. Watching a man enjoy a hot dog and a beer at Wrigley Field. In the most unexpected, unanticipated moments, the glory breaks through to remind us that the glory is always there. Marvelous is unique and marvelous because it reminds us that if we but open ourselves to the presence and the transcendence and the joy of God, we ourselves can become transfigured. Transcendent in Christ, transformed in Christ, transfigured